This video is only part of an unpaid, unbiased, in-depth review from an average rider's perspective, so check out the rest in the link below at thegoodride.com. Welcome to The Good Ride. I'm James Beastie. Thanks for being here. And this is the LibTech Lost Retro Ripper. I rode this a while back in a 166, only got it on some groomers, and when I found that they made a 161, I just said, what the hell? I bought this and put this through its paces in everything from groomers to pretty deep powder to moderate powder and a little bit of everything in between. Really wanted to put out an in-depth review that it deserves. I rode this primarily with my Union Atlas and Burton Kendos and compared this against several different boards. Solomon, Wooly, Nivelt Fish 157, the Karua Dart, the Weston Japau, the Jones Stormwolf, and many others. To give you a short summary, this is a very setback, very directional, very surfy ride that to me seems like full-on super camber. It has a really healthy bow of camber, and you wouldn't expect this for a board of this shape in this era of hybrid snowboards. But what that does is it gives you incredible pop and drive out of the turns. This is a very turny, almost hooky if you don't detune the edges, ride on groomers. In powder, it's a board you really want to set all the way back, but if you do, you're going to get very good directional float. And it's very retro. It is very much like its name. And if you love full camber and you want a tapered, directional, swallowtail kind of ride that you can carve on groomers and get really good float in powder. Not exceptional like some of the hybrid shapes out there, but very close. This might be the board for you. Now, when it comes to sizing, I've ridden now the 166, the 156, and the 161. The 66 was a little too big for my taste unless I was in deep powder, but I didn't get to get that in deep powder, but I would have loved to. The 56 was just too small. I felt like fat guy in a little coat with that one, but the 161 was just right. And I'm glad that most of the time of riding with the Retro Ripper was on the 61. Felt great for my weight, and my boot size worked really well for it. I think you could go just a touch larger, maybe up to 10, and maybe a touch smaller if you want, if you're a similar weight with me, like an 8.5, but this worked really well for my size 9s, and I was kind of surprised. Now, when it comes to the shape, you can see you got a big swallowtail here. It's very directional. It's very set back. It's all about riding off the tail like you would a surfboard. And of course it likes a lot more back foot weight, but it seemed like it was stance angle agnostic. I could ride it slightly ducked and it did well. I could ride it slightly posy and it did well. And I could ride it really posy and it did well. It didn't really shine in one stance angle versus another, so I really like that. But this camber profile is full on camber. This is camber from tip to tail. It is locked in. It feels very catchy, very technical. It's definitely for more expert riders or advanced riders who are very technical and always on their game. It's not that easy to skid turns, and there were a couple times where I felt like I was about to catch an edge if I didn't snap my game back in. So this is just not a mellow ride. Now let's talk flex here. You've got a very stiff flex right between the feet here. This is just all stiffness. But then if you push it out and I put my elbow here, you can see it's got a medium stiff flex with a lot of give in the tail, mainly because it is so swallow. The nose is just a little less stiffness than the middle, but definitely softer. But then you have these forks and it just tweaks here, and it's really fun leaning into those swallowtails And playing around with that on a butter or just a really hard turn, it surprised me at first when I leaned back into this how easy the tail butters. So it's great in powder to wheelie up if you need to, and I really like that. Pops so well too. This full camber ride, you feel like you're on just really good shocks. You can feel the camber more than almost any other board in its peer group. It just pops hard, and I just loved how anytime I ollied off of something, even though I was pretty far back on the tail, I just felt this thing spring and bring me up higher than I thought I would. And I was surprised, being average like I am, that this board still popped so well for me. So yeah, it's full, technical, catchy camber, but it still allowed somebody like me to just snap this into the air. And as far as the overall flex personality, this just rides really well in all conditions. It's definitely a Mervin board, and they seem to do something where they accentuate the wood core. They basically make it feel really wood-like, really poppy, but not dead, very lively. It can get a little chattery, a little bucky, a little bouncy, especially with all this camber, but it's definitely not bad, and it's a pretty good all conditions ride. Now, when it comes to speed and base glide and all that, I've never been that stoked on Mervin bases. This is a good base, and when well waxed, it has good base glide, but unlike some other boards I've tried in this price range, the base dries up pretty fast. It has to be waxed like every other day for it to keep going. Sometimes it can get pretty dry and thirsty, and when it does, it gets slower than other bases in its peer group. It's fast, but it's not like ultra fast. It's just, you know, a little bit above average. So that's kind of one drawback, but if you're good with waxing, it'll keep its speed well, and it didn't feel like a slouch when it was well waxed at all. And when it comes to just mountain speed, this has a lot of side cut. It's very turny, so it's not really the kind of board you get to bomb, but it could do okay here and there on a straight line or two that I did, but I'm not really a straight liner kind of guy. But if you are, you might want something else like the Weston Japau or Jones Stormwolf. Those are much more straight liney boards that you would probably like a lot better. Now, when it comes to edge hold, this has pretty good grip. There is no disruption in the side cut that I can see. If it is, it's so subtle, it's hard to notice. It is not like the other LibTech Magna Traction boards or Mervin Magna Traction boards, GNU and LibTech. This just has its own kind of traditional, old school, retro side cut. It grips well in hard to borderline icy snow, but not amazing. You definitely aren't getting Magna Traction like you would from other boards in their line. Now, when it comes to turning and carving and turn initiation, I found that this just tapered shape, even though it has a pretty wide waist and a wide nose, the tail comes down to being somewhat normal for my boot size. It initiated a turn pretty quick, and when you got it on edge, this wanted to turn. This loves across the groomer and circle carves. It loves those really turny, really like tight circles. It really likes that. When you get more longer and drawn out down the line S-turns, kind of narrower S-turns, this just doesn't really excel there. It really likes to always be on edge. When I rode the 156 at a demo, it felt a little hooky. So when I bought this board, I slightly detuned the edges in the nose, and it didn't feel as hooky at all. But it really likes to be on edge. It really likes to be turning. And when you get into a carve, wow, this thing has so much spring and drive out of a turn. So don't just get this for powder. This is a board you could ride every day, basically. This has great carving capabilities. But now let's talk about powder. This is a very good floaty board. I mean, you just look at the shape, you can see. All that camber really worried me. and it made me think that this might not be that great in powder. And what I first did is what I do with most swallowtails is I didn't set it back all the way. And when I did that, it didn't float as well as a lot of the peers like the Kurua Dart, which I pretty much ride centered or sometimes even a little forward in powder because that tail sinks so well. This is not as swallowtail-y as a lot of swallowtail boards. It looks that way, but it isn't. And so when I set it all the way back, okay, then the float came into play, and it felt like it was almost there with the Kurua Dart, the Weston Japal, and so many other boards. It was kind of right there with the Storm Wolf. Definitely not there with the Woolly Nivelt that I tried. That was just way more floaty, but it does pretty good. And I even rode my Spring Break powder pill. I was just doing powder samplers, just going to the car, taking a run, switching out boards, doing that all day, and it was uncrowded and perfect. It was a great day for a powder sampler. This hung in there with the best of the best when it was set all the way back, as far back as you could. I felt like it was a very good powder board. Not the effortless, easy float, but you get all that camber pop, so it's a nice compromise for those who like a camber board in powder and want exceptional float. This will do it for you. So overall, I had a really good time with this, and I think what really made me happy about this ride was how well it turned on groomers and how turny and carvy it is, but you still have an amazing floating board in powder, and if you can get past the thirsty base that needs to be waxed all the time, I think this would be a great board. And man, I just love these graphics. I just think it's beautiful. This just like translucent red just really calls to me. So there you have it. That's the Retro Ripper. Now, giving advice on YouTube is very difficult because I need a lot of info from you to actually help. So if you want real advice, fill out the eHarmony profile in the link below so I can help you properly. If this video helps, please consider subscribing and buying through our links, or even better, become a member on YouTube or Patreon. You'll get exclusive access to video review shorts as we test gear, along with a lot of other perks. So thanks for watching, and I hope this review helps.